Welcome to today's guest interview with Dr. Magdalena Fosse. I'm thrilled that Magdalena has agreed to visit us in the Seekers Forum today. So, Magdalena, welcome, and let's just get right to it. So, let's talk about monogamy and polyamory specifically. I was struck by something you write in your new book. You say, for many people, the interest in non-monogamy and especially polyamory comes from the experience of death.
Hmm,
Can you elaborate? What do you mean by that?
that's right. Uh, so the experience of non-monogamy or the pathway to non-monogamy is very different for different people, and then there is a certain generational factor. So for people who are coming to non-monogamy as very young people nowadays, it's a relational format that it's more widely accepted. So they might so their experience of this possibility is very different than the experience of people who started as monogamous, so coming from the normative perspective. And what I mean by the connection to death is that the interest in non-monogamy and polyamory as one format of non-monogamy is connected to the sense of loss. It can be a direct loss of a relationship, cherished relationship. It can be a symbolic loss. So the loss of trust in monogamy as a format. It can be exacerbated by one's personal experiences. So let's say parental divorce, or in the sense of betrayal or transgressions that one has experienced, in which the dominant form or the belief in the security of monogamy is shattered. So that's what I mean, that it's often connected to the experience of death, symbolic, and the actual death as represented by loss.
Mm. Right. So it's in the loss when the story falls apart, the story of monogamy, the story of security falls apart. It opens us to new possibilities of intimacy and self-knowledge.
Yes.
And do you see infidelity as a subset of non-monogamy? Or is it something completely on its own? And I'm curious about how infidelity relates to fear of missing out, fear of death. I think of the movie Moonstruck. You may have seen it, where the wife is asking, why do men chase women? Why do men chase women? And finally someone says at the end, because they're afraid to die. And so what is that connection between fear of missing out, fear of death, and infidelity?
Oh, that's another great question and an observation. So the fear of missing out, um, taking a zooming out and then taking a broad look, broad perspective first. So for people who you know, as a society, we live longer. People live longer on average. And then even the concept at the very basic level of having one partner for life, if you expect to live to your 80s, 90s, and maybe even older, and then having one partner, like if you belong to the generation that got married in their 20s. So the idea, like, I'm going to stay with this one person for the next 50, 60, 70 years and only have this one sexual experience, it can be really existentially daunting. Like, what do you mean? That's all there is? So that's one of the examples of like how the fear of mortality, fear of missing out is playing out.
Mm.
And also we are observing now, like, of people living life differently, having all these options that they didn't have necessarily before, or were they seeking out but secretively. So that connects to your question about infidelity. Non-monogamy has never been fully strictly monogamous. And if I make a little tangential digression, that it's still very connected. Even animals that we consider to be paragons of monogamy, when they are closely observed, biologists and zoologists, they conclude that they are not forming socially monogamous bonds, but not biologically monogamous bonds. So basically, they stray when the opportunities allows, and as long as they are not discovered. So again, that's the nature of the nature of us as humans who are capable of monogamy, but also we've always, within the bounds of monogamy, we've always practiced some form of non-monogamy, just more or less secretively.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yes, so swans, one of the paragons of monogamy, actually. Like if you look at the eggs and the offsprings, do the analysis, there are plenty of swan babies that come from different fathers, and then
Even swans get around.
even swans get around.
Oh
But,
no.
but that's actually a very helpful in this very important distinction: social monogamy and sexual monogamy. So we might prefer social monogamy for a number of reasons, and seek sexual non-monogamy, and either openly or not openly. So infidelity, like nowadays, infidelity is actually it acquired a new name, and this name is it's no longer cheating. It's basically it's non-ethical non-monogamy. So that's
Is that what they call it?
yes, depending on the community that within you are functioning.
Right. So getting back to the existential dimension of this, you say that polyamory and negotiated non-monogamy represent the hope that it's possible to overcome sexual and relational dearth and death. So is that how it can link to hope and the relief of anxiety?
Yes. Yeah. So again, like what I mentioned earlier, that's one example. Like if you expect to live a long life, and many people have this expectation for a good reason, and only be present, only be sexually involved with one partner, so that can be a dreadful perspective. And being able to engage openly, so openly, honestly, in a transparent way with multiple partners represents hope, a hope that maybe relationships can be conducted differently. And again, there are generational factors at play, because what I mentioned earlier, that young people who are growing up, so for those of you who have children, presumably at least some of them are talking about non-monogamy, or maybe engaging non-monogamy, coming to you and then talking about like, well, I have multiple partners. So they come to this to exploration of relationship with a different hope than the generations that grew up with the normative format of monogamy. And then that was also associated with security and then tradition, but also with the dread about the limitations. There's
Mm-hmm.
an interesting, like returning for a moment to what is referred to in the field, in my field, as monopoly wars. So where pride in monogamy meets phobia about polyamory, or in reversal. Poly pride meets monophobia. So returning to that, people in polyamorous and non-monogamous communities, they look at monogamy as something outdated, as a trapping, that it doesn't allow them to evolve. So they actually they consider non-monogamy as a more evolved way of being in relationships, because it requires a lot of processing, and then again, with the principles of openness and transparency, it can be done, and it can lead to really fulfilling and then deep connections. It doesn't mean that it's pain-free, because what looks great on the paper, it doesn't translate to ease of emotions.
Right. So from a clinical point of view, are there any benefits to a person looking at their non-monogamous impulses, not acting on them, but somehow being able to channel the desire that's driving it uh, back into the monogamous relationship in some way? Do you work with people to enlarge imagination, role play, play in general? What impact does that have on people who feel claustrophobic in relationships?
Oh, absolutely. Many couples. So if I think about my patients, I use the terms patient-client interchangeably. So if I think about my patients, they roughly speaking belong to three groups. The first group are people who are thinking about opening up. So they want to do it right. So they come to me, knowing that I specialize in polyamory and non-monogamy, with the quest, like, help us to do it in a way that doesn't destroy our relationship. The second group is people who have already opened up and who are going through the turbulations and then discover like how it wasn't so easy as they were led to believe. And and the third group is people who have been in practicing non-monogamy for sometimes for many years and are encountering new problems. Returning now to the first group, and that's the group that you are asked in some ways that you are referring to, Mark, which is it's a group in which people are valuing or maybe not willing to risk their monogamous relationship, but are still wondering about like what can be done, what kind of openness can be available, is available to them. And sometimes this exploration can take a format of exploring their fantasies, not necessarily enacting them, but actually talking about the possibilities, talking about longings. So that in itself, and then with the recognition, like, yes, it will be very nice. Actually, it will be wonderful on some levels to be in a more open relationship. But actually, we are not ready to risk what we have because it's too precious. So that's an exploration within, and while at the same time returning to something that it's to them, it's safe and maybe even sacred. And so exploration of fantasies and then role playing, or even allowing for maybe some maybe opening up some of the boundaries to the definition of non-monogamy truly depends on a person and a couple, because or what's a transgression in monogamy also depends on a person or a couple. So for one couple, one or both partners being in a physically close with other people, so hugging, even kissing, might not be considered betrayal. For another couple, for another person, it might be a transgression. So exploring like what their boundaries can or what their relationship can open up to and tolerate can also allow for the exploration in a without actually stepping into the full engagement, sexual engagement, or emotional, romantic engagement with other people. But like it all comes from the meaning people attribute to what's important, and the safety within the boundaries they have and value, or and then what their anxiety allows them to open up to and tolerate.
So it's about allowing yourself to ask questions, removing the taboo against expressing curiosity or dissatisfaction, and that releases a kind of openness and sympathy between people that they can then make a more conscious choice together about how to proceed.
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes with the greater appreciations for what they have, because many people say like, well, I love the idea of being engaged with other people. I love the idea of non-monogamy, but then, it's like, it's too much anxiety. It's like, I can't.
It's more trouble than it's worth.
Yes, exactly. It's not worth it. So I'm going to entertain it in my, maybe like, oh, I know that I'm not doing anything wrong, because that's reference to fantasies. When people have fantasies, sexual fantasies involving other people, multiple people perhaps, and then some people feel comfortable with that idea. Other people think like, no, something is wrong with me. I cannot possibly say it out loud. And then now, if they can actually acknowledge it to themselves, like, no, this is okay. This is not, doesn't mean that I am doing something wrong, abnormal, and pathological. We typically we fantasize about a number of different things. So if there is like some reassurance about that, so that's that's a form of opening up to exploration about what's possible, what's permissible, and then playing with the fantasies.
Is part of this process allowing the shadow to play as well, and allowing shadow materials to come up around sexuality and blessing our desires, really making space and acceptance for what we may have hidden out of shame or guilt or fear.
Oh, completely. So the shadow part. So the definition of shadow is that there is something that it's the most basic definition of the shadow part is that it's something hidden, very very often unknown to us, so repressed and unconscious, that can be brought to consciousness in thinking about the layers of shadows. So the shadow that is known and acknowledged for a person individually might not be acknowledged relationally. So one example would be a person who is cross-dressing. So when I say a person who is cross-dressing, it's usually a man. Women have the freedom to dress in almost any kind of clothing. So a woman dressed in typically male clothing, it's not making anyone wonder about what's this about. For men dressing in female clothing, it's more bordering on the expression or the question about what is this shadow part. So that's the question for the person himself, but also very often for their partners, is with the questions about, you are not the same person I thought you to be if the cross-dressing is discovered by accident. And so the shadow side might be for the person for the man who is questioning his own sexuality, his own gender, his own identity, and then coming to terms with what this represents for this person. What's the meaning of the cross-dressing? How is it connected to gender expression, to sexuality, and then or other longings? And then likewise, if we're talking about a couple, so the parallel process of engaging with the shadow part and with the question, can it be integrated to this couple's dynamics in forms of acceptance, maybe in forms of embracing it as something that is sexually important for this male partner, might be difficult for the female partner if we're talking about a heterosexual couple. But maybe it can be a part of something that they have a space for, but also contain in a way that feels good for them. Which again, depending on the couple, the level of or the degree of openness will vary.
It's interesting that you mentioned integration. I recently worked with someone who had a desire to cross-dress, a man who had a desire to cross-dress. He told his ex-wife eventually. She said, "Well, that's okay, but do it on your own because I'm not attracted to women." So
Yeah.
they stayed in that relationship for a while. Eventually, they broke up, and he met a woman who is very comfortable with it, allows him to do it around her, and he's much, much happier. He
Yes.
doesn't feel like he has to sequester himself, and there was an implicit shame in the
Yeah.
other relationship.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yes. So this is a perfect example how it can go in two different directions.
Yeah.
So it can actually lead to a greater sense of trust and openness in the relationship because they dealt successfully or with the shadow, and it's no longer a shadow, it's integrated. And there are other relationships in which cross-dressing of one partner leads to the dissolution of the relationship because it's too threatening. Because the assumption is that you are either other gender, you are interested in other kinds of sexuality, and I'm not going. This is not working for me.
Right, right. For
The
him,
sh-
it was just for him it was just he likes nylons and high heels. It wasn't any deeper than that. He's still heterosexual,
yeah.
but it was more it was an aesthetic thing, a sensual thing for him.
Yeah, actually, so to speak to that, like a lot of men also, they speak with longing about like all the options women have. Like, oh my God,
That's what he said. He said women get to wear all these soft, beautiful, lovely things, and I have to wear jeans and button-down shirts. And speaking of dearth, and feeling and feeling like you're missing out, uh, that was something that he couldn't suppress in himself.
yeah.
Yeah.
Mm.
I hope you're enjoying this conversation from the Seekers Forum. If you'd like to hear the rest of this interview and learn more about our robust collection of talks, videos, and guided writing sessions, please join us at theseekersforum.com and sign up for our free 30-day trial membership. I hope to see you there. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.